I met these guys, and they were journalists like we all were, just going around reporting on what they saw. But Al Jazeera was being treated differently. There were regular reports of their journalists being detained, questioned when they arrived at the scenes of these explosions, and it really made me think why there was this huge misunderstanding. I want to find out more about that. And I thought it also spoke more largely to what I was seeing on the ground, and the gulf of misunderstanding between what was going on in that country and what was being reported about it. So when I heard that Al Jazeera was going to launch an English language channel, I went from Baghdad to Qatar, where this was being done, to actually help launch the channel and get it on air. That was in 2005, and the channel launched in 2006. It's been a few years we've been trying to establish ourselves, but the most important thing is to get carriage in the US to really try and spread the word about the work Al Jazeera is doing. So to tell you a bit more about the channel, I've been told to speak about examples of places in the world where Al Jazeera is reporting stories that haven't received the right amount of attention as they should be. I've actually just come back from Haiti. I've been based there for the last year and a half as Al Jazeera's correspondent on the ground. Haiti is one of those stories that really isn't reported very thoroughly in mainstream media. It's a place where there are tragic circumstances unfolding every day. I arrived in the aftermath of the earthquake and saw the rescue efforts and how people were trying to get the country back on its feet. And we decided to set up a bureau there. Al Jazeera established the first international network news bureau to have a permanent presence on the ground. We stayed there for the next 18 months documenting the pace of the reconstruction effort and tried to explain some of the things that were going wrong on the ground. And there were some examples that we found of how the news is often reported in a way that doesn't reflect the reality of the situation on the ground. The response to the initial earthquake, the rescue effort for those first few days and weeks, there were stories about looting, how Haitians were going to supermarkets and stealing food and water and trying to basically challenge the security forces to get those supplies from shops. And Al Jazeera at that point actually banned the term looting. It had been several days of food and water being bottlenecked at the airport and not getting out to the places where it was needed most. And we started to report the news in a different way to the mainstream news outlets. We questioned the term looting, and we were reporting more on why aid wasn't reaching those places, what was happening with the supplies of food and medical equipment that was arriving at the airport. So we also reported on those circumstances, why there was this particular nature of a response to an earthquake. There were thousands of troops on the ground very quickly, heavily armed, and it spoke to what we heard from many Haitians as a big misunderstanding about what that country is like. There's a perception of Haiti as a very dangerous place that is poverty-stricken and full of people who are prone to start rioting at the slightest sign of insecurity. And the earthquake was obviously a huge upheaval, and there was a big fear for many of the aid workers that they were actually going to be attacked after nightfall. There were instances of aid workers going home after when night started falling. And many of the Haitians that we were speaking to were saying their lives were lost as a result of that, that there was this fear and this misunderstanding of Haitians as a dangerous people that were going to actually challenge the security of these aid workers. So we started reporting on that, and we got heavily criticized at the time. Al Jazeera was actually singled out by the State Department for the reports that we did. But the rescue effort now at this point, when people look back, is considered to be one of the successes of an 18-month period that's really been pretty much a failure. I mean, the aid workers and the NGO officials that you speak to on the ground, most of them really acknowledge that the pace of the reconstruction effort there has been very slow. But they look back on the rescue effort and say, well, at least we did that properly. But if you look at figures of the number of people that were rescued, say, in China after the earthquake in 2009, there were 90,000 people pulled from the rubble after that disaster. In Haiti, there were 1,800 international rescuers that were sent to try to save people and pull people out of the rubble. The total figure that they actually saved was 132. So, examples like this and the stories that we were doing were different to the kind of narrative that you were hearing from other news outlets on the ground. And we set about trying to report Haiti from the perspective of a country that has been misrepresented in the media for many years. Haiti is one of the poorest countries in the world. It's tops the disaster categories in almost every indicator you can think of, whether it's life expectancy or education or teenage pregnancy and mortality. There's all sorts of indicators which show that Haiti is at the very bottom of the rung. But it's a country which at the same time has this incredible history. It was the world's first successful slave revolt. It was really a revolution that inspired revolutions across Latin America, and it doesn't often get considered when the media talks about Haiti and why things are happening on the ground. There isn't much questioning of what's behind these policies that have made Haiti what it is today. So Al Jazeera for the next 18 months set about trying to do those stories and reporting the country from the background and context and history, and speaking to Haitians about why they thought that, despite so many millions of dollars and so many NGOs on the ground, there was still so little progress. And the feedback that we got was phenomenal from the Haitians that we spoke to. We were pretty much the only international news network there. There were wire services, but we were the only broadcaster in the country. And this really was something quite different. Haitians really responded amazingly to this. And Al Jazeera made the commitment to follow this story and establish this bureau because they thought this was an important story and a story that should be told to the world. So this is what Al Jazeera is all about. This is one of the examples of why I'm proud to work for this channel. I've been told to talk also about the professionalism of Al Jazeera, the standards, to try and dispel some of the myths that many people have about this network. It's funny, I've actually been here for about 3 years in the US, traveling around. I did the campaign in 2008 and remember speaking to people that we met on the campaign trail. This was the first time I worked in the US for Al Jazeera, and it was a time when there was still quite a lot of stigma attached to the channel. The response I get was often confrontational. When I first arrived, Al Jazeera, we were in a small town somewhere and people heard that Al Jazeera was reporting there, they sometimes called the local sheriff to come and arrest you. It was a very different time, and I think things are changing. I think the images that people have of Al Jazeera are starting to change, and I think this year has helped a lot. There's been a huge amount of progress in the coverage that we've done throughout the Middle East. It's really changed the image of Al Jazeera as a more kind of positive channel. For the first time, Americans are hearing that we are championing democracy and reporting stories of these people who are trying to shake off these autocratic regimes. So I think that's really helped, but I think more needs to be done on trying to get the word out that this channel is different to the mainstream news, and I think there's a real need for it here in America, given the kind of level of coverage on the mainstream US cable networks. For example, we've just come back from Libya and Bahrain. The film you just saw there was a promo that we've done for a show that's coming out soon. I see my boss has just arrived, so I better plug the show. It's a fault-line special that's coming out in mid-July. It's going to be a 2-part series on the US response to the Arab Spring. And we've basically taken Libya and Bahrain as 2 examples of US policy response to this huge upheaval in the Middle East. We're comparing and contrasting what seem to be 2 very different approaches there. And we've come back from the region after having traveled around and asking people like the head of the 5th Fleet stationed in Bahrain about the human rights situation, why they're not speaking out more to say the same kinds of things that they're saying about other countries which are seeing these kinds of revolutions. And I think that's what Al Jazeera is about as well. It's about doing different stories to those that you see anywhere else. We're getting an hour show together, 2 30-minute shows. And this really is the first time that we're hearing from people we interview that they're even being asked these questions. It's funny the amount of times you interview somebody for Al Jazeera and they tell you that that's the first time they've ever been asked something about US foreign policy in that respect. People don't, I think, question enough why these decisions are being made, what's behind the decisions that you see impacting people around the world. And Al Jazeera is about asking those questions. It's about challenging the established wisdom on news events around the world. And I think the work that you guys are doing is fantastic. I think it's the only way forward is to really change people's minds by explaining that Al Jazeera isn't what people have heard about in the news, dispelling myths. I've heard all sorts of stories about Al Jazeera that we show the headings on TV, that we always show messages from Osama bin Laden. Al Jazeera is never shown the headings on TV. I think it's one of the most common misconceptions that I've heard. In terms of bin Laden, I think it's something like, I forget the figure, but it's something like 10 times the amount of airtime CNN has given to Osama bin Laden and Al Jazeera. But because we get those stories first, we're often also accused of somehow supporting somebody who most people in the Middle East find unacceptable. And I think those myths about Al Jazeera can be very dangerous, and they've been perpetuated by certainly officials in previous administrations. What Donald Rumsfeld said about Al Jazeera was very damaging, because often I think a lot of the people I speak to here don't have a lot of information about what this channel is all about. The fact that Al Jazeera English, I think probably 50% of the journalists are Westerners. People like myself, people who work for CNN, BBC, mainstream Western news channels who simply had enough of the way the news is reported and want to try and do things differently. That's why I joined Al Jazeera, and I think that's why this channel is so important. And I think it's fantastic that you guys are willing to try and help us get the word out that this is not Terror TV. This is a news channel that really has very high standards of journalistic integrity and is there to question established wisdom and decisions that have been made in Washington. I don't think that if Al Jazeera becomes as mainstream and unquestioning as anyone else, that anyone's really going to watch it. I mean, why would anyone watch Al Jazeera if you're hearing the same kinds of stories that you're hearing everywhere else? I think that the way that Al Jazeera can succeed is by keeping to those ideals and providing a real alternative to mainstream media. And I think there's a big desire for that, especially in America. I think that in this country people have grown tired of the types of news coverage that they receive. There aren't many choices out there. And the type of news that you watch on some of these main cable networks is personality-driven, partisan, and to be honest, just pretty uninteresting. It's not informative. I think Al Jazeera tries to inform, and the stories that we do are designed to try to give context and explain what's going on around the world. Rather than just report the news, we actually try to show what's behind why this news is happening. And I think that's going to be very popular. I think that's the key to making Al Jazeera successful. I think everyone in the channel is fully aware of that, and I don't think there's any question that as more people start watching Al Jazeera, we're going to go away from those kinds of values. That's been the key to Al Jazeera's success in the Middle East. That's why it's the most watched channel across the Middle East by far, because they've been challenging those established wisdoms and asking those questions. So I think it's key to Al Jazeera's success. I think everyone's fully aware of that, and that's not going to change. That's why we're joined Al Jazeera. I think you're right. Perhaps as we start to get more carriage in the US, there could be more stories about the US in particular. But there are also bureaus that we're opening across the country. We're opening bureaus in Chicago. We're expanding in LA. We're expanding in New York. We're opening in Miami. There is a real desire here to cover the US in a way that it hasn't been covered and isn't covered by US networks themselves. I think Al Jazeera is in a good position to do that.